I've spent my entire life believing that gardens are the only places where the world actually makes sense. As a landscape designer, I deal in the currency of growth, patience, and the slow, deliberate rhythm of the seasons. But if there's one thing I've learned digging in the dirt of Willow Creek, it's that the most beautiful lawns often hide the shallowest roots and the most toxic neighbors. It was a Saturday in late May, one of those rare mornings where the humidity hasn't yet turned the air into a wet blanket. I was out back, shears in hand, tending to the Sentinel. That's the name I gave the 20-year-old silver leaf maple that stands at the heart of my property. My parents planted it the day we signed the deed to this house, back when I was just a kid with dirt under my fingernails and big dreams. That tree isn't just timber and chlorophyll. It's a living timeline of my life. Its branches held my first swing. Its roots drink from the same soil that holds my family's history. It was the reason I became a designer, to build worlds around anchors like this. I was lost in the meditative rhythm of pruning when the silence was shattered. It wasn't a loud noise, but it was sharp, a voice that sounded like a serrated knife cutting through silk. "Excuse me? Hello. I hope you're planning on taking that eyesore down soon." I turned around, wiping sweat from my brow, to see Denise Sterling standing at the edge of my lawn. She had moved into the house next door about 6 months ago, and she was the embodiment of everything I dislike about modern suburbia. She wore a high-cropped, razor-sharp bob, the kind of haircut that demands to speak to a supervisor, and oversized designer sunglasses that shielded her eyes like riot gear. She was draped in expensive, athleisure wear that looked like it had never seen a drop of actual sweat. "Good morning, Denise," I said, keeping my voice level, though my stomach did a slow roll. "If by eyesore you mean this majestic maple, then no. I'm actually just giving it its spring trim." Denise didn't smile. She never did. She stepped forward, her heels sinking into my manicured turf. "It's a nuisance, Spencer. It drops leaves all over my meticulously curated perennial beds. The shade it casts is literally suffocating my prize-winning hydrangeas. As a former high-end landscape architect for Vanguard Designs, I can tell you professionally, this tree is a structural disaster. It disrupts the visual continuity of the entire block." I took a deep breath. This was the first time she had played the professional card so aggressively. "With all due respect, Denise, I've had the Sentinel appraised by an arborist every year. It's perfectly healthy. And as for the shade, well, that's just nature. It was here long before your hydrangeas, and it'll be here long after." Her lips thinned into a pale, dangerous line. "We'll see about that. I've recently been appointed to the board of the Highlands Homeowners Association, and we're looking into reforming the neighborhood aesthetic. Your tree doesn't fit the vision." She turned on her heel and marched away, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and mounting dread in her wake. I stood there, looking up at the sprawling canopy of a maple. The leaves flickered in the wind, 1,000 silver tongues whispering. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the shade. The escalation didn't take long. That afternoon, a white truck pulled into Denise's driveway. 3 men hopped out and began unloading rolls of chain link and heavy wooden posts. I walked to the edge of my porch, watching with a growing sense of unease. They weren't just fixing her fence, they were tearing it down. By 4 p.m., I realized something was very wrong. The new posts weren't going into the old holes. They were being hammered into the ground nearly 8 inches onto my side of the property line. It was a blatant land grab, but more importantly, it created a narrow, hidden corridor, a no-man's land between her house and my tree that was completely obscured from my kitchen window. I walked over, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hey, excuse me," I called out to the foreman. "You're over the line. Those posts are on my property." The foreman looked at a clipboard, then at Denise, who was standing on her porch like a general overseeing a battlefield. She descended the stairs, a smug, practiced innocence on her face. "Actually, Spencer, I had a private survey done. The old fence was encroaching on my land. I'm simply reclaiming what's mine. If you have an issue, feel free to hire your own surveyor. But until then, stay off my property." I was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of it. A professional survey would cost me $3,000 and take weeks to schedule. She knew that. She was counting on it. As the sun began to set, the fence went up, a wooden wall that now hugged the backside of the Sentinel, creating a dark, private nook where Denise could do whatever she wanted, shielded from my sight. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring into the darkness. I felt like a man watching a predator circle his home, knowing the doors weren't locked. The following morning was Sunday, the kind of day that's supposed to be for coffee in the Sunday Times. But the air felt heavy, charged with a static I couldn't explain. Around 11 a.m., I headed out to the yard to finish the mulching I'd started. As I rounded the trunk of the Sentinel, I saw it. My knees went weak. At the base of the tree, on the side facing the new fence, there was a hole. It wasn't a natural knot or an insect boring. It was a perfect half-inch circle drilled at a downward angle deep into the heartwood. Around the edges of the hole, a sticky brownish-orange residue was weeping down the bark. The smell hit me a second later, a sharp, metallic chemical odor that made my eyes water. "No," I whispered, my hands trembling as I touched the wound. No, no, no. Someone had used a power drill to bypass the tree's protective bark and had injected high-concentrate herbicide, likely something like Garlon 4 or a massive dose of glyphosate, directly into the cambium layer. They weren't just damaging the tree. They were trying to give a lethal injection. I didn't think. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. "I need an officer at 1248 Maplewood Lane," I told the dispatcher, my voice cracking. "My neighbor just tried to kill a 20-year-old tree. This is criminal property damage." 30 minutes later, Officer David Miller of the St. Jude Police Department pulled up. He was a veteran cop, the kind who'd seen everything from armed robberies to cats in trees, but even he looked taken aback when I showed him the hole. He took photos, touched the residue with a gloved finger, and shook his head. "This looks deliberate, Mr. Harland," Miller said, his voice low. "But here's the problem. Unless I have a video of her holding the drill, or a witness who saw the bit enter the wood, it's her word against yours. She'll just say the tree was sick, and you're looking for someone to blame." Just then, my neighbor from across the street, Eleanor Vance, walked over. Eleanor was a retired schoolteacher who noticed everything but said very little. She looked at the police car, then at me, then at the hole. "I saw her, Spencer," Eleanor said quietly. "Around 9:30 this morning. I was pulling my car out to go to church. Denise was back there with a yellow DeWalt drill. I thought she was just fixing the fence. I didn't realize." My heart soared, then plummeted. A witness was good, but would it be enough for a conviction? I walked over to Denise's house with Officer Miller. When she opened the door, she looked annoyed, not nervous. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Your neighbor claims you damaged his tree, Miss Sterling," Miller said. Denise laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Damaged it? Officer, that tree is a dying hazard. It's infested with emerald ash borers, or whatever maples get. I was merely inspecting the boundary. If the tree is dying, it's a liability to the Highlands HOA. In fact, I've already drafted a formal notice of removal. Spencer has 7 days to cut it down, or the association will do it for him and lien his house for the cost." She was one step ahead. She wasn't just killing the tree. She was using the law to make me pay for its funeral. The next few days were a blur of frantic phone calls. I reached out to a friend, Thomas Miller, a master arborist who specialized in tree forensics. He came over on Monday morning with a kit that looked like it belonged in a crime lab. He took samples of the residue and the wood pulp. "It's bad, Spencer," Thomas told me, looking up at the canopy. "The leaves on the north side are already starting to curl." She used a professional-grade stump killer. She knew exactly where to drill to hit the main nutrient line. But he paused, a glint of defiance in his eyes. She didn't account for how resilient an old maple can be. "If we flush the system and seal the wound today, we might save it. It'll be scarred, but it'll live." While Thomas worked on the tree, I worked on Denise. I started digging into her past. I called a contact at the State Board of Architects. What I found was a goldmine of malice. Denise Sterling hadn't left Vanguard Designs. She had been fired and her license had been suspended after she was caught falsifying land surveys to bypass environmental protections on a multi-million-dollar condo project. She was a pariah in the professional world. She moved to Willow Creek to rebuild her ego by treating our neighborhood like her private kingdom. But I needed a smoking gun. I needed something that would break her hold over the HOA board and the president, Arthur Blake. Arthur was a decent man, but he was old and easily intimidated by Denise's expert jargon. On Wednesday night, I installed 3 high-definition night vision cameras, one in the eaves of my roof, one in the bushes, and one hidden inside a hollowed-out birdhouse right next to the Sentinel. I sat in my dark living room, watching the feed on my iPad. "Come on, Denise," I whispered. "I know you can't help yourself. You need to see it die." Around 2 a.m., the motion sensor tripped. A figure emerged from the shadows of Denise's house. She was dressed in all black, carrying a plastic-gallon jug and a long-necked funnel. She approached the fence, reached through the gap she had illegally created, and began pouring more poison into the hole. The camera in the birdhouse caught it all. Every drop, every smirk. The moonlight reflected off her glasses, capturing the face of a woman who felt absolutely untouchable. I didn't call the police then. I waited. I wanted her to think she had one. I wanted the trap to be perfect. The following Saturday was the monthly Highlands HOA general meeting. The community center was packed. Denise was sitting at the head table next to Arthur Blake, looking regal and triumphant. She had already put tree removal, 1248 Maplewood, on the official agenda. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up. The room went quiet. I could see Denise leaning back, a predatory smile playing on her lips. "Mr. President, members of the board," I began, my voice steady. "I've been told my tree is a hazard. I've been told it's diseased and must be removed. I've been told this by a woman who claims to be a professional architect." Denise interrupted, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Spencer, we all understand you're emotional, but the safety of a neighborhood comes first. The tree is clearly failing." "You're right, Denise," I said, turning to face her. "It is failing, but not because of disease. It's failing because it was murdered." The room erupted in whispers. I pulled out a remote and clicked the projector. "I'd like to show you a portfolio of Ms. Sterling's recent work," I said. First, I showed the documents from the state board, the record of her revoked license, and the lawsuits for land survey fraud. Arthur Blake's jaw dropped. The neighbors began to murmur, the sound rising like a swarm of bees. And finally, I said, the main event. I hit play. The 4K footage filled the screen. There was Denise, clear as day, in the middle of the night, funneling poison into the heart of my family's history. You could hear the liquid splashing. You could see her wipe a drop off her sleeve with a look of pure disgust. The silence that followed was deafening. Denise stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. That is an invasion of privacy. That footage is manipulated. I was treating it for pests. With Stump Killer, Thomas, the arborist, stood up from the back of the room. "I'm the expert witness here. I've analyzed the samples. That wasn't pesticide, Miss Sterling. That was a calculated attempt to destroy private property in a designated city heritage tree. That was the killing blow. Because the Sentinel was registered as a heritage tree, harming it wasn't just a neighborly dispute. It was a state-level felony." The doors at the back of the room opened. Officer Miller stepped in, followed by a second officer. They didn't go to the podium. They went straight to the head table. "Denise Sterling," Miller said, his voice echoing. "You're under arrest for felony criminal mischief, trespassing, and violation of the State Environmental Protection Act. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The queen of the HOA was led out in handcuffs, her expensive bob disheveled, her screams of, "Do you know who I am?" fading as the heavy doors swung shut. Arthur Blake stood up, looking older than he had 10 minutes ago. He looked at me, then at the empty chair where Denise had sat. "Spencer, the board formally rescinds the removal order, and we will be launching an immediate audit of every aesthetic change Ms. Sterling suggested. I am deeply sorry. It's been 6 months since that night." Denise ended up taking a plea deal, 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, ironically, cleaning up city parks, and a restitution fine of $42,000 to cover the cost of the tree's recovery and my legal fees. She had to sell her house to pay for it. The new family that moved in has a young daughter who spends every afternoon climbing the lower branches of the maple. The sentinel is still there. If you look closely at the backside, you can see the scar where the bark is healing over the hole, a permanent reminder of the summer it almost died. But the leaves are greener than ever, and the shade it casts feels a little cooler, a little deeper. I won. But as I sit on my porch and watch the wind move through the branches, I can't help but think about how close I came to losing it all. Was I right to record her in the dark of night, or did I stoop to her level of deception? When an HOA becomes a weapon for a single person's ego, is the system itself broken beyond repair? And if you found out your neighbor was poisoning your history, how far would you go to dig up the truth? Let me know in the comments. And remember, watch your fences.